strategic, ideation, individualization, arranger, and maximizer. My name is Curtis Germany, and I'm the HR director of Clark County, Nevada. My biggest aha moment around learning my strengths was probably learning how, one, they tie together, and two, how I have been trained almost, right, to exercise some of those strengths through my experiences.
I'm Darren Verasamy.
I'm Brandon Miller.
And this is The Strengths Whisper, the show empowering leaders to create, build, and sustain great places to work. Today, we have Curtis Germany, the Human Resources Director for Clark County, Nevada. Curtis, welcome to the show. It's great to see you and great to have you on.
Hey, great to see you too, Darren.
Curtis, you just took the Clifton StrengthsFinder assessment in the past week, and that was your first experience period with it. I know you've experienced a lot of assessments in your career and in your journey, as we had spoken about, but this was your first time taking the Clifton StrengthsFinder assessment. Is that correct?
Yeah, the first time taking this one, so it was definitely an interesting experience.
What was interesting about it? What was it like just taking the assessment before we even get into the results? What was that whole experience for you like? Because it is timed, right?
Yeah, and I think that was like the first thing, right? Anytime you're being timed, you're always like, okay, I don't want to miss any questions. I want to evaluate a great assessment of what I'm doing. But I don't know, there's something about knowing there's a clock behind you always makes you feel like, I don't remember, there's 15, 20 seconds. I got to click. And then some things did stop and make you think like, oh, I could be on this extreme or the other, or am I in the middle? So I think that was one of the things that I found pretty interesting about how it was, as opposed to Scantron or a bubbling or something like that.
Yeah, and it has. Can you talk about what it would do? It would create these pairs, right? So it put one statement on one side, one on the other, and then you'd have 5 bubbles in between to kind of fill out. Can you remember any of the statements that kind of had you going, wow, I could be both of those? How dare they ask me to pick?
Yeah, I think there were some in there where it was around things that were probably, I'll say, more social versus more educational focus, right? It's like, well, hey, I like to read, but I also like to go out with my friends and things like that. So trying to figure out where I land. And then in the middle, sometimes there's opportunity to be neutral on those things, but you're like, I'm on the clock. Then it's like, okay, but if I had a choice, would I want to go out with my friends or would I want to read a book? I might want to go out with my friends.
And it might not be 100% going out with the friends, but just a little more towards going out with the friends than staying and reading the book.
Exactly. And I guess it probably depends on the week that you had to.
And the reason it gives you these items that are actually not opposites of each other. I think your example that you gave, I want to go out with my friends or I want to read a book, there might be something as well that shows up on the assessment that says, I like a lot of order and structure, and I like a lot of variety. And then people might say, wait, I like both of those. I do like variety and I like order and structure. But then when they think about it, they're like, I'm a little bit more this way. Curtis, let me ask you this. Why did you think that you had a time limit? You had 20 seconds to answer these statements. Any thoughts on that?
As I was looking at, I think it's 170-ish questions.
177. Yep.
When you're reading the instructions, it tells you these questions, and just knowing that the test is going to keep moving with or without you, right? And so I think that was the big thing for me, is you want to be decisive. But I think that's the one thing I liked about this assessment is it didn't allow you to overthink. Because you only had 20 seconds, because you knew you were on the clock, it didn't give you the opportunity to second guess yourself. And I think a lot of times we don't want to trust our intuition or our gut with things just in life, not just in an assessment. And typically your first thought is oftentimes your best response.
And it's really insightful what you said, and that's spot on with how the Gallup organization, in creating the Clifton StrengthsFinder assessment, as the algorithm has built and over time, that's exactly what they focused on in creating these natural top of mind responses. So imagine this, Curtis, we were sitting in the same room. We're sitting across from each other. All of a sudden, a snake just falls out of the ceiling and just lands on the desk with us. And there's 7 other people that are in there. You're going to have 7 viscerally very different responses that takes place at that point. So the top of mind responses is exactly what we're going, because that is our most natural innate response that goes through. The example that was given many years ago was, imagine you're on an aircraft and then the pilot's like, oh my gosh, the plane's going down. Somebody might be like, oh my gosh, they're freaking out. Somebody's trying to open the emergency door. Another person's like, I got an extra shot of bourbon here. I'm going to go ahead and have it, right? So everybody's going to have that different response. But in creating that time constriction, it's measuring where do we go to? What is our most natural thinking patterns? And in the algorithms that Gallup has generated over the years, and they just crossed over 30 million people at the time of this recording that have taken the assessment internationally. That's really powerful. It's a talent measurement tool. So that's the big part of what it is. And talent's defined as our natural patterns of thought, feeling, and behavior that can be productively applied. Let's jump into your results. So just looking through your results, you got your complete 34 report. Out of those top 10, were there any words, even before you read them, that jumped out at you and said, yeah, that's definitely me? Or what in the heck is that?
When I got the results, which were instant pretty much too, which is cool. You're not waiting after the assessment. So I kind of like that too. So I submitted, got the results, downloaded them. And the first one was strategic. And I often talk about myself being a strategic leader or strategic HR professional. And oftentimes my career path into my role is not your typical progression through HR. And so there are things in the HR space that I have not done from the technical side. I've always done it from a strategic side. So I've always referred to myself, even on my cards that I have for networking, as a strategic HR professional. People ask you, like, what does that mean? So I thought that was very interesting that was the first characteristic that popped out on this one. And then as I was looking through those top 10, the one that I was trying to understand what it was about, the maximizer, that was that number 5, I believe. As I read through the toolkit, that one started to resonate with me a little bit more because it's talking about giving individuals recognition and praise and things of that. So it's pretty enlightening when you start sitting down and reading through this and you start thinking of interactions that you had or conversations that you may have had with team members present or in the past. And you're like, I can totally see how this ties into it. So I found the whole thing pretty fascinating, right? To kind of look at it, because it's really like looking yourself in the mirror. And we don't oftentimes get a chance to stop and think about, why am I like this? Or how come I do things like this? Or when I say give a direction, why do people take it as something different than what I intended? So there was a lot of things within here that really gave me some insights. I really did focus on some of those top 5. So some of those things were really insightful, I thought.
Curtis, what you just said there, how you just started off really focusing on the top 5. When you first get this full 34 report, it's a 25-page report. It's a lot. It can be a little intimidating at first, but there is a top 5 one that starts, even if you've taken the full 34, but really drilling down into them in blocks of 5. That's really a powerful way of starting it. Tell us, what does it actually mean to you to be a strategic HR professional? How would you define that?
I think in HR, as we have seen a transition in our profession as going from personnel departments and things of that nature to being human resources business partners, being at the seat of the tables that are very important to us to drive our businesses. And I think that was one thing that was interesting for me in learning from other, I should say, HR professionals, is that they often felt that they didn't have a seat at the table. It actually took me a long time to understand, why aren't you involved in strategy? Because I learned human resources from a labor negotiator seat. So I literally always was at the table.
Literally the table to keep the human lifeblood of organizations healthy and running.
Exactly. So this idea, when I'm talking to HR professionals at high levels saying they feel like they didn't have a seat at the table, it took me some years to understand what they meant, because I was a little naive coming from a labor negotiator seat. I'm like, people always ask me my opinion on how we could drive the organization forward. How can we avoid certain strifes with the labor unions, with the employees? How can we build morale? Those questions have been posed to me pretty much since my inception into a HR department, because I was always on the labor relations side. And so being strategic really is about, for me, it's not just looking at the present. We're post-pandemic, the job market's changed, can the experience change? I'm also thinking, what's going to be going on 5 years from now? What can we anticipate? And that's what we always thought, because in labor, we're always looking 3 to 5 years out, because that's how long contracts used to be. we're always looking 3 to 5 years out, and how can we support the organization now, but also in the future? So really it's a forward thinking mechanism to drive the organization forward is how I think of strategic.
Thanks for sharing that, Curtis. And in building on the Clifton StrengthsFinder result, your number one strategic that comes out of that particular talent, we hear the word strategic and we have just a notion of what is strategic? What does it mean? And the Clifton StrengthsFinder definition ties into some of that, but it actually has its own set of operating principles as well, which I think is really important. So when we think of that strength in particular, strategic, it has the ability to naturally and rapidly see all of the pathways of where things are headed, where they're going, oftentimes before others have and others can. And what's really unique in the work that you've had is when we look at your number 10, it's futuristic. So you were naturally in an environment for a lot of your earlier years in your career where you were at the table, where you were looking at these 3 to 5 year contracts. When we develop our talents, you got to actually do the work in there. You might have naturally had in your nature a bent towards this futurist type perspective and the need to see where things are going, but you worked in a role where that muscle was getting flexed regularly, and there was clearly some level of enjoyment in thinking and framing that. And I know it's just from the preliminary conversation we had in your current role now and the way that you're even looking at HR's role in government for the longer haul. So when you have those two together, what futuristic does, Curtis, is it's able to cast the vision of what could be and create a path, and even at the table, get others excited about what could be, or seeing that, hey, this is what it could look like, this is where we'll be, and it paints that picture. What strategic brings is the pathways on how to actually get there. So strategic operates more of the pathway builder and looking at it and weighing the options of, if we went in this direction, what's good about that? What are the watch outs for that? And it can see the numerous pathways across the valley to get to the next mountainside or to get to that future of what we're seeing. So those two together combined are really powerful. And we jump to your maximizer, which is your number 5. And I'm going to put these 3 together. When we think of strategic and futuristic, not only do they have that orientation of creating the ideas of what could be, they contribute to others when we think of it on a spectrum of time with a lens towards the future. Maximizer can contribute with a lens towards the future. And naturally, it goes and says, well, what's really strong right now? What are we doing right now? And if we invest our time and energy in these areas that we're strong right now, how is that going to build us towards the future that we're looking at happening? So maximizer is the StrengthsFinder strength, meaning it is the strength that most naturally gravitates towards focusing on building through our strengths as opposed to looking at our areas of weakness. So to get to the future and evaluating the strategies and the best paths forward, it's going to want to maximize on what we're doing well already and how we can continue to attract and build towards that. Does any of that connect some dots for you? Like, what are you seeing based on those descriptions and connecting those 3 in particular?
That makes a lot of sense, especially as we're starting from strategic, futuristic, and maximizer. The way you describe it, I can see that tie in definitely, because when we are dealing with problems, whether they're labor or other HR perspective issues, is that there are oftentimes multiple ways to get to that destination of where you're trying to get to. So looking at those and being able to see that, okay, we can take A, B, or C to get to the end of the road, and then trying to figure out what makes sense from a short-term, but also a long-term perspective, right? Because the road less traveled is sometimes the road you need to take to position yourself, your organization in such a way that it is valuable for all, right? And then when you tie it into that whole maximizer piece, it just kind of really does make sense, especially when we're talking about working with individuals, trying to motivate them, get the best out of them, get the best out of ourselves. One of my big things is I'm not going to ask someone on my team to do something I'm not willing to do myself. If I'm not going to put in that extra effort, how am I going to expect you to put in that extra effort? I think these all tie together really well. I'm pretty fascinated by the results, and it's interesting to hear you break it down.
What I want to share with you, if somebody comes to the table when many people have strategic, ideation, arranger, and maximizer, and significance, frankly, in their top 10. And they say, can't be done. Oftentimes, those strengths will look and say, watch me find a way. When somebody's coming like, this looks impossible, this can't be done. One of the ways that those combinations of strengths contribute from a leadership lens, from being a people-first leader, is not just the resistance of, watch me, I'm going to get it done. When we're leading, we can figure out how to get people re-engaged and show them, hey, they're right. That road is closed. There was a rock slide on that road. But that does not mean that's the only route to get to where we're trying to go. And we're going to pause and we're going to look and come up with ideas and different directions on how we can do that. Maybe that was the road that we wanted to choose. And initially, before that obstacle came up, that would have been the best road. That's off the table. We're okay with that. But we can't come up with the finite closure of it can't be done, period. And strategic is naturally thinking in terms of possibility. So when we think of strategic and ideation, the natural go-to for those two strengths in particular, Curtis, is the possibilities. They're looking for the this could be. It's not necessarily laying out that we have to do it this way, but they naturally contribute by getting others aligned around the possibilities of what could be. Futuristic can come in and actually paint the brushstroke as well and really create that picture more clearly for others. You talked about the maximizer. When you read into your results, your version of maximizer lent itself towards being able to give people positive feedback on what they're doing well and understanding that. And that is part of what maximizers will do. They'll naturally gravitate towards seeing people's strengths. They can. That's definitely a part of it. What's unique about your combination there, Curtis, is with individualization and a relator, those are two strong relationship building strengths. So maximizer shows up in your lens more through the path of seeing it in people, because part of your strategy in the work that you've done in HR has been people related, it sounds, from where we're at. And individualization, last thing I'll say here, what's unique about that individualization combo, having that coupled with arranger and maximizer, individualization naturally sees what's really individual and unique about each person. So what they do that's really unique that they can bring to the table. It starts understanding what makes people tick and has the ability to adapt our style of interacting with different groups of people to create those stronger connections. So what can happen over time from a strategic standpoint, coming back to your strategic HR professional, individualization naturally understands people from an individual lens. Arranger is constantly looking for the ways to integrate them into the whole. Arranger is like the conductor of an orchestra. If you think of the conductor of an orchestra, Curtis, they don't play an instrument. Their back is to the audience most of the time, right? But they get the right amount of cello, the right amount of kettle drum, whatever it is, at just the right time because they understand the individual contributions that people can bring. So when those two are paired together from a people strategy point, not just strategic in the traditional way that we think about it, but how the people go through and having a fundamental understanding of how their talents fit together to move things forward, there's a powerful lens that these strengths combine to bring and that can allow us to move initiatives forward, see what needs to get done, where we might need to, hey, you know what, we need to hold off on this or we need to adjust our pacing a little bit because we're going to have these slowdowns in these areas to find our path forward. Maybe the movement is not to go straight at it. Maybe we need to go on a little bit of a detour because I can get the people more aligned to get to where we're trying to go. To launch this strategic initiative, we have to have the people side. So you have this unique blend of the strategic, the tactical, execution-based strengths like strategic ideation. Achiever is an execution-based strength. Arranger is an execution-based strength. But then you've got this strong lens of people strengths, like I talked about, your orange influencing strengths and your blue relationship building strengths. So that blend creates a unique ability to understand the tactical and the people side, how they fit together to advance initiatives. Any thoughts on that?
I think a lot of stuff you resonated with me. So I think one of the things when you go back to the strategic piece is oftentimes when I'm starting a conversation with a team about a problem, I usually start with a statement about, let's talk about what's in the realm of the possible. So it's not give me an answer, give me one thing, give me two things. Tell me what's in the realm of the possible. And then we can work through those ideas. Because oftentimes when I'm in government versus when I'm in private sector, there are different constraints. There's public policy, public information, and obviously budgets look much different when I'm in the public sector. But before we start saying why we can't do something, let's talk about what's in the realm of possible. That's where I always start in my thought process. So I think that really resonated with some things you were saying there. And also you touched on the individualization and that idea of what makes people tick. And one thing I also say to people is what makes one person tick won't make another person talk. So looking at how am I going to motivate you, Darren, as a team member here with me is going to be completely different how I motivate team member Curtis or what gets me out of bed in the morning. So I'm really big on that because sometimes if we blindly just see someone as this superstar performer, I can see them as the CFO of the organization or the next HR director or whatever they may be. And that person has zero desire to do anything like that. They just want to be a great individual contributor. And I'm putting all of my thoughts into you and what I think you're capable of without ever even stopping to say, what makes you get out of bed in the morning? Why do you lace up your shoes and come into the office and put your best foot forward every single day? For them, it's not about money. It's not about ego. It's about doing a good job, being a professional in their space or whatever it is that motivates them. So I think when you tie them all together, if I'm listening to you and I think about conversations that I have with my team, a lot of things that you're saying are resonating and make some sense based on this strength assessment.
Thanks for sharing that. And I'm really happy we got to the one person's tick doesn't make another person's talk and having you explain that. I had that down, definitely something that I wanted to give you the floor to address because I thought that was so cool. What's fascinating, Curtis, about the Clifton Strengths process and what we've seen within organizations as it goes through, like you're going through the process now of having these ahas for yourself. But when we're looking at across a team, like when we're looking at those that we lead, that we manage, that we develop, and we start seeing them through the lens of their strengths, the clarity of the drivers of the why for their tick versus their talk, these different areas becomes really clear because we start understanding their fundamental needs that they might have and how they're going to contribute more effectively. I give you a great example of this. Sometimes for our executing strengths, like some of yours, like achiever and arranger, they're going to need to have an idea of why we're doing what we're doing. Where are we going with this? Once they have that clarity, their natural tendency is to want to execute, to get things completed and get things finished. But if they don't have the clarity on why we're doing this, then they're going to struggle moving forward because they don't have clarity on what the actual finish line looks like. In leading with the statement, like you said, like, hey, we're just laying some possibilities down. We might not have a finish line because we're actually trying to define what the finish line is. When leaders are aware that, hey, I'm going to be defining possibilities and I want people to just throw ideas out, but I realize this team member is predominantly execution based. They're constantly looking for the finish line. This conversation, if I don't frame this up properly, their go-to is going to be like, why are we talking about this? Because all they're looking for is how to get to a finish line so they can execute on it. And when we have that understanding of how people show up, it can move the needle on getting much clearer on how we converse and how we move people forward in the process. So it's really interesting in that journey. Curtis, you occupy a fascinating role within Clark County. So for those of you that don't know, Clark County is where Las Vegas is. And I think one of the things that you've stated is we're trying to actually create Clark County in a way that there's more to Clark County than just Las Vegas. Is that fair to say?
That's very fair to say. And I think that we are very proud of our world famous Las Vegas Strip, of course, but there is a lot more to our community than meets the eye, right? Most people, when they travel here, that's the focus. They go to the tourist destinations and the spaces. But for us who live here, for the community, and even for people who decide to, or who are looking into moving here, the community is much larger than just entertainment and gaming. And now sports. We've got all the sports coming to town too. There's a lot more to offer in our community. A lot of people don't know that about Mount Charleston, or you can go skiing just up the street, or Lake Mead. And there's just so much that's going on out here. And it's just overall a really great community. And so one of the things that we're trying to do in our space from an HR seat is partner with our communications team who's working on branding as well to educate our talent pools about not only the opportunities to work in Clark County and work for Clark County, but the opportunity to make Clark County a home, because people who live here, like, we very rarely step foot on the strip, but there's still a whole lot of fun you could have here in the Las Vegas Valley and do things. So it's the education piece of what we're about. We're a different community now than we were 10, 20 years ago. Some people say, oh, I haven't been to Vegas in over a decade. I was like, oh, a lot's changed. You may not recognize some things. Like, we changed our landscape quite a bit, and we're super proud of the progress that we're making. And we're a major urban metro now. It's not just a tourist destination, and it's allowing people to see themselves living in a community that is not just a gaming destination, but it's actually a real community with real people, some of the most beautifully master planned neighborhoods you probably can find in this country, to be quite honest. And so there's a lot going on out here, and it's that education and awareness that we're trying to bring forward and incorporate that as a part of our recruitment strategies and trying to bring talent into the Las Vegas Valley. Because as you can imagine, like most organizations, private or public, there were things that happened in the pandemic, coming out of the pandemic. People made life decisions, right? They retired, they moved, they reprioritized, rearranged their lives and things like that. And we're not immune from that either. Vacancies, attraction, and then retention is very important to that. And what I tell my team is, in HR here, we serve the people that serve the people. How can we get that messaging out to know that you're a part of something bigger here when you're working for Clark County? We're one of the largest organizations in Nevada. What's unique about our state is we make up about 75% of the entire population of the whole state in Clark County, Nevada. And so we're a very unique place in our structure and what we can offer. And we want to make sure that people can see that here.
Curtis, I really appreciate what you've just shared. And I think what is very unique about your approach to HR is you bring a community building perspective beyond the organization. You do a lot of keynotes as well outside of your work as the HR director for Clark County. It's something that people have you come in and speak about. And I think this goes beyond just the realms of Clark County. This is a message I think is very, very important for HR directors at a government level to understand. Can you share a little bit about that? HR's role in helping to build the community. I'm talking about how your focus as an HR director is actually to help build the community. So in your case, it would be Clark County. The role that HR plays, though, in making sure that we're building the community, and how talent and getting the right talent into the community at large for Clark County will actually drive and accelerate the growth of the community.
I appreciate that. So that clarification is important, because I think that when you work in the government, like, we are in the people business as a whole, whether we're building Allegiant Stadium where the Raiders play. We've got F1 coming to town here this year for the first time, but there's a huge people component behind the scenes to all of that. And Clark County, being the government body of most of what people refer to as the Las Vegas Valley, it's very important that we create an entire environment in this community where people want to come here, stay here, make a life here, and the people who are born and raised here want to stay here and make a life here, because knowing that we are doing things that are different, we believe better than a lot of communities in a lot of different ways. And it's such a unique way to do that. There's a mall across the street from me. If you're going to build a mall like that, what's that going to do, right? That's going to bring in jobs from day one. You're going to have construction jobs in the private sector. We're going to have people in the building department here at the county who've got to go out to those sites, look at those sites. There are going to be partnerships with energy companies, public utilities. There's all these different intricacies, right? When you're talking about building a community, building infrastructure, the opportunity to build multi-billion-dollar projects at the rate that the Las Vegas Valley does. We've got a Fontainebleau that's about to open up in a few months, hotel. So there's all these great things that are going on in our community. In order to have these great amenities, it takes people. And the people in the government are central to making sure that we have that growth, that we have the talent, and we're changing. As the world changes, we change. There's more emphasis on things like green jobs and sustainability, solar, electrification. These things weren't talked about 25 years ago when I came into public sector. These are things that are happening very fast around us. And a lot of us, if we're not involved with the government, you don't realize how many touch points there are to get a project off the ground and how many different talent pools you need to tap into to build these things and build these opportunities. So I think that's what's really important when you're talking about government, especially city and county government. The folks who work for us provide critical needs to our communities, because without them, our houses don't get built. Yes, we got to have contractors coming to build those houses, but there's a whole bunch of permits, planning departments, people who are making sure that those projects come to fruition, and they happen behind the scenes. No one sees it happening. Right now, while we're talking, we've got people out there making a difference in our community. But before they can go out there and make a difference in our community, HR's got to find them. HR's got to get them in the process, get them applying, and hopefully onboard them. And we keep them for a long, long time.
Curtis, I'm ready to come move to Clark County and come work for you, man. Your number 6 strength is significance. What Curtis just articulated, my listeners, is the power of that strength. You're an HR director. It's easy to see the role as I'm here to serve the needs of Clark County. Significance naturally sees the significance of the work that we're doing and how it fits into a much, much bigger whole. And what can often happen when we pair significance and futuristic together, Curtis, where you can see that vision of what could be, you're talking in the future, this is what it's going to take, this is what it's going to look like. We can get others inspired to be a part of something that's bigger than self. So somebody's not just getting a job at Clark County, they're coming and being a community builder. And you need people that are joining Clark County to be community builders, because you understand the needs of talent growing the community. And the work that is done in Clark County as an organization is going to help attract and retain the talent in other areas, because there's all these little touch points that do tie back to how the county is operating, is interacting, and how we're getting things moving forward. You said it, like the ability to move multi-billion-dollar projects through at the rate that they're taking place. We've got to have the right people in place for doing that from a community standpoint. You're not the building department. You're not going in and going through that. But the work that you do does have those touches and significance when we hear it and experience it in the way that you just presented that, in understanding your role as an HR director and how it fits into a much bigger picture perspective than just meeting the needs of the county. It was just a powerful display of that strength. So I just have to call that out, because we can get people energized and motivated and say, yeah, I want to be a part of that. And we got to keep motivating, inspiring, energizing, and showing people that inspiration, motivation, connection, they only work if we do it regularly. So on that note, Curtis, before I hand it back over to you for just a moment, I just want to say thank you, Curtis, for joining us and sharing your story. You're truly a people first leader, and really appreciate you taking the time to share a portion of your story. And for our listeners out there, I want to ask, are you ready to discover your strengths to accelerate into life, into your work, like Curtis has? We believe in this path so much that we're offering our listeners the opportunity to discover their top 5 Clifton strengths. All you got to do is email us at Brandon, BRANDON, at 34strong.com with the subject line top 5 to request your StrengthsFinder code. On that note, Curtis, I just want to give you the floor. Any final thoughts that you have that you would share with your peers about what it means to be a people first leader? Your peers as other HR directors like you. What does that mean to you?
So first, Aaron, I want to thank you for the opportunity to chat with you today. I've enjoyed our time together. One thing I just probably close out with saying, and early in my career, I heard a judge say this, and I've probably applied it to more things that he actually meant it to apply to at the time. He said at a meeting, behind every piece of paper that comes across our desk, there's a heartbeat attached to it. And that has stuck with me for nearly 20 years in this business, because every resume application that we handle, there's someone who's taken the time to seek that opportunity. We should be appreciative of that, and knowing that the decisions that we make every single day actually have an impact. It's not just a piece of paper. It's not just a resume. It's not just an application. There's a person attached to that. And we take that approach to think about people over process. I think that we can add a lot more value to our organizations every single day.
Curtis, that was beautiful. I really appreciate that. Behind every piece of paper, there's a heartbeat. Curtis, if our listeners want to learn more about you, if they want to connect with you, what would be the best ways for them to do that?
I think the best way to reach me is on LinkedIn. Very active on LinkedIn. So Curtis Germany on LinkedIn. I believe there's only 2 of us on there. I'm connected to the other one. Please reach out. More than happy to connect with HR professionals and professionals in general. I do a lot of article writing. I do a little bit of publishing myself. So more than happy to connect with some of your listeners. I really appreciate the time and speaking with you today.
And just like that, we will leave it there. Curtis, thanks again so much for joining us. And to our listeners, we want to thank you so much for joining us on the Strengths Whisper. We'll see you soon.